Welcome to Devil's Advocate. I'm Pam Benigno, Director of the Education Policy Center at the Independence Institute. Today you're going to hear an amazing story from a man who taught high school for 17 years, then made millions in real estate development, but couldn't read. Welcome, John Corcoran, President and CEO of the John Corcoran Foundation. And welcome, Debora Scheffel, member of the State Board of Education and literacy expert. Let's start out with John. John, you couldn't read until you were much older in life, which you're going to tell more about that. But how did it feel as a young boy to not be able to read?
In telling my story, 48 years of reading at an elementary level, as a child, I was loved by my parents, and for the first 6 years of my life, I was told I was a winner, and I was innocently went off to school with high hopes to learn to read like children do. And the first year of school was fine. It was a nice place to be, enjoyed it. In the second grade, they started talking about teaching us to read. And like about 25% of the population learns to read, like birds learn to fly. And on the opposite end of the spectrum, about 25% of the population has difficulty processing language and learning how to read. And I was one of those children. And I ended up in the dumb row. And so the innocent child goes to school and learns real quick. Coming from an environment where I was a winner, and within 2 years of going to school, I was a loser. And I ended up in the dumb row. I didn't know how I got there.
In the dumb row.
The dumb row.
I read your book,
yes.
The Teacher Who Couldn't Read, and you talk about the dumb row, and the Buzzards was the reading group.
Right. And the teacher didn't call it the dumb row, but everybody in the room knew who was sitting in that row, and we were the dumb ones, and we were the ones that were having the difficulty learning to read, learning the alphabet. And so we struggled with it. I had math skills, I had social skills, I had family support. And so in the first and second grade, by the time I got to about the third or fourth grade, the demands for literacy skills are increasing. I'm losing ground. Now I'm starting to feel dumb because I can't please the teacher, I can't do the work. And so by the time I'm in the fifth grade now, and this is a pretty typical story. I mean, this is still going on today in this city, in the school districts all over this country. I started acting out and confused, and by the time I was in the fifth grade, I was a behavioral problem. And when my parents came to school, they talked about, and the teacher talked about my behavior. I would rather turn my desk over than and I was threatened when I was called on to read because I couldn't read, I couldn't compete.
But did the teachers tell your parents that you couldn't read, or did the teachers even know that you couldn't read?
Well, in the second grade, my parents came to the parents' conference and the teachers' conference, and I was a good boy at that time. I was still innocent. I wasn't acting out. And they said that I was a smart boy. I enjoyed recess. I was polite, and that I would get it. And I've talked to thousands of adults that can't read, and they said that was a similar experience. They were told that they would get it. They'd eventually get it. I guess through osmosis or some other way. But the reality is, little boys and little girls like me need direct instruction, and we just didn't get it. And then the situation changed, and we weren't talking about my reading problems anymore. And this is what happens. The behavioral problems overshadow that, and so there wasn't any discussion. And it's a question I'd only have to speculate on, but they knew enough to put me in the dumb row, you know. So yeah, I think teachers did know. Sometimes people ask me, how did you keep your secret? I kept my secret for 48 years. It's a shame-based secret. It's an embarrassing secret. And like I said, in the fifth grade, sixth grade, seventh grade, I was suspended from school. I was just a problem child.
But your parents still didn't know that you couldn't read,
No.
and you were socially promoted, and then you got into junior high and high school. How did you get by then?
Well, social promotion's been around for a long time, and I was just socially promoted, moved along, and they never did hold me back. I was threatened all the time. I didn't pass anything. I didn't cheat or anything. I didn't do anything. And but by the time I got to middle school, I'd given up on myself, and I thought the system gave up on me too. And this is, again, retrospect. I didn't have these words, and sometimes people ask, why didn't you ask for help? And children should not have to ask adults for help. I wouldn't even be able to articulate what my needs were. And by the time I got to high school, I had athletic skills. I started dating the valedictorian. I started cheating, getting tests, and so I was going to go through that system to be eligible.
Oh, I read one story where you actually passed an essay booklet out the window for another student.
Yeah, and that was a little later. That was when I got an athletic scholarship to go to a Division I school, and so then I really became an aggressive cheater, and that was just one of the many desperate things that I did to cheat my way through college. And one of the hard things about telling this story, I have to sort of confess my sins and crimes and trespasses, and it gets complicated, you know. As a college student, a lot of it's about, and I gave names to these sub-personalities. I called the little boy Johnny the Innocent, and I called the teenager Johnny the Native Alien, and the college boy was Johnny the Desperado. And you sort of get trapped in being underground and keeping your secret, and there's no place to go to get help.
Let's stop here for a minute with a story. And Dr. Scheffel, why don't you tell us a little bit about what is literacy?
You know, literacy really has been defined variously, but I think we think of it really as a way to get meaning from text. And so it's a meaning-based process, but it's really based on understanding the structure of language. And I think you rightfully said that for kids to learn to read, we need teachers that understand language, that understand the sounds of the language, the words that comprise our language, the way words get strung together in sentences, and can teach those skills explicitly and directly to kids who are struggling.
I think we also, literate people, underestimate the power of their literacy. And I know that I think differently now that I'm a literate person. And certainly, I think adults that can't read, in a way, in America, we're suspended in our childhood, emotionally, psychologically, spiritually, intellectually. So when an adult, or when I'm talking about an adult, I'm talking about kids in middle school too, young adults. Our lives change in a big way, and I think we've underestimated the power and the importance of it. It's more than just decoding words, and it's a whole process. And we talk about our students that don't think. Well, I know I think differently now.
And so you taught for 17 years. You made millions in real estate. And then you decided that you wanted to learn how to read.
Well,
how did that work?
I think I decided when I was 6 years old that I wanted to learn to read. I just had a bumpy road, you know, and I always wanted to know. I always knew instinctively. I knew the power of it beyond anything that I experienced. And little children, we figured it out when we're 6 years old, 7 years old, that we're not getting it. We're second-class citizens. We can't compete. And in America today, it's probably one of the most important educational issues in this country, and one of the most important human rights and civil rights issue.
So how did you learn to read?
I went to a public library, an adult reading program.
You were 48 years old?
I was 48 years old. And I do want to say I always wanted to, and a window open, and the timing was right. I got to say, a part of me gave up because I couldn't get it. You know, psychologically, you protect yourself. And it was about the time Barbara Bush was talking about adult illiteracy, and we were teaching people to read, and I overheard a conversation that's a couple women in a grocery store said that their brother was learning to read, so I went off to the library in high hopes again. Adults do not think they can learn to read. And when you go to the learning table and you can't think that, that's a problem. But I had a 65-year-old volunteer that I spent about 13 months with her, and she got me to the 6th grade level. And then I went to the Lindenwood Bell Clinic and had a battery of tests, and I went from the 6th grade level to the 12th grade level in a matter of 120 hours. And what I always say, doctor, the key to teaching little boys and little girls like me to read is proper instruction. And proper instruction comes from properly trained teachers, and they come from universities where they're properly prepared. And I know you are an expert on that one.
Well, and I kind of like to segue off what you said before, which is just that, you can render your life into an oral language environment where you're just speaking and listening, but you still lack the ability to read the written word, which is such an important tool for accessing the past. I mean, if you can't read, how do you find out about history? And how do you imagine the future that's different? So it's such an important tool.
It absolutely is. And in Colorado, we have over 20,000 4th graders last year that were not proficient in reading.
Right.
So what's the problem? How come in Colorado we have this problem?
Well, and I think Colorado is like many of the other states where there are, a fourth to a third of the kids, sometimes more, who really struggle to get the basics of reading. Between the grades of kindergarten and 3rd grade, kids are learning to read. And after that, they need to read to learn. And if they don't get the foundation pieces, then they really struggle all the way through school, being able to access content in history and science and so forth. So why do we have this issue? Well, we can think about a couple of leverage points. One of them certainly is teacher preparation. And a number of reform groups have been thinking about that and looking at that over the last number of years. And as we think about, so how can teacher preparation be most effective? I mean, 90% of students go through traditional universities and get a teaching license. 50% of teachers have master's degrees, so is it more education and more courses? Not necessarily, unless they're really learning how to teach children to read.
Well, and I talk to teachers quite often, and I've talked to several just recently that said, oh, I had one reading course for my teacher preparation program, or maybe they had 2. And they said, I really didn't learn how to teach children how to read. Now, do we really know how to teach children to read?
Well, and that's one of the great things about the whole research base for K through 3 literacy. We have the most robust research foundation for that of many of the other areas in education. We absolutely know how to teach children to read, and we can impart it to teachers, and we can do that through traditional or non-traditional programs. Some of the districts are doing teacher preparation locally because they want to take control of that really important task for the teachers they hire. But absolutely, we have a very robust research base. We know how to do it. We need to close the gap between the knowing and the doing.
And I second that. And if we did anything right in the last 15 years, we did the research, and it's there. We know the human brain is capable of learning to read. And it's just like I got proper instruction when I was 48 years old, and I could have had, and I learned to read. And had I had that proper instruction at 8, I could have learned to read at 8, and that would have been great. It was also great to learn to read at the age of 48. And this nation needs to know that it's never too late to learn to read. And I think the focus is on this basic core. I mean, if you can't read, you just can't succeed. The dominant language for our formal education system is the written word. After the 3rd grade, you better know how to read, write, and spell, or be on that path. And also, the other thing is happening in our culture. When I was a young man, there were jobs for people that could read at the elementary level. There are no jobs right now in this country, and when we recover from the economic crisis that we're in, we're going to have to prepare people, and we're going to have to teach them how to. And you're not getting on the information highway. You're not using the computer without those language skills. And something I wanted to share also with you, you made a comment about the oral language, and I always think about, I belong to the largest subculture in the United States, and it's an oral tribe, and we keep a secret. Now, not too many people really have communications with us. And when I think about, and I recall in junior high school somewhere, my history teacher saying that defining our literacy, the beginning of civilization. The beginning of civilization is when we started writing, and And we know, what do we call, what do the anthropologists call people that only have an oral language? We used to call them primitive people, now we call them underdeveloped. And we got a huge subculture. You know, 40% of our adults in this country belong to an underdeveloped oral tribe, in a sense.
I think the most recent national statistics are like 90 million adults scoring basic or below basic, which is just insufficient for the jobs that we have.
Let's talk a minute about what Colorado's doing. This past year there was a, call it the Colorado READ Act, passed with Governor Hickenlooper's support. It's really based on what Florida has done. Florida has done a lot of great reforms in the area of reading. You want to tell us a little bit about this new legislation, and then we can talk about, is that really enough?
That we need. Yeah, the READ Act, I think, is a good step in the right direction. It was modeled to some degree, or informed, I think, by the legislation that Florida passed a number of years ago. And it really seeks to end social promotion, especially in the early grades, because we know that the prediction is that if a child's not on grade level by the end of 3rd grade, he or she has a low likelihood of ever being on grade level. So we really need to have early intervention. We need to have great instruction by teachers that are very well prepared, that have a track record of being successful teaching students to read. And the READ Act really helps us, I think, bring parents into the conversation and look carefully at data so we know the students that are struggling, and we can ensure that they are not just being socially promoted during those crucial K-3 years. The state board will develop recommendations for assessments and also for interventions that have a high likelihood of accelerating learning. Because if kids are getting behind, it's not enough to make 1 year's growth in 1 year. We have to accelerate learning with programs that are based on the research, that are based on what reading really is. And that's what we hope the READ Act can help us with in Colorado.
So how are parents supposed to know if their child is receiving reading instruction that is actually scientifically based?
I think the READ Act really brings parents into the conversation. Parents sometimes are not given really clear information as to where their child really is achieving. And so one of the things the READ Act does is ask for assessment in the K-3 grades. We haven't had that. And then providing that information to parents and then bringing them into discussion frequently every year in those early grades so that they can look at the data and help make decisions about would the child benefit from retention or not. Obviously, we don't want children to be retained. We want to be doing the kind of instruction that allows them to keep pace and to be on grade level. But if they are struggling and they need extra time, retention, I think, can be viewed as the gift of time, but only if something different happens in the 2nd year. And some kids don't need a whole year. They might need a boot camp experience in the summer.
That's the critical
intensive
component.
Intervention. Yeah.
If we talk about holding people back, hold them back to do the same thing that they failed. So that's the critical piece, I think. And I know that we have good news, but we also have an urgency that I don't think this nation they're not there. And we don't have the political will at this time to really focus on this literacy issue. And it's one of those things that's not debatable. You know, I mean, everybody agrees that this is a pure, noble, righteous cause for us to impart these skills. We've taken on a noble mission also as a nation to say we're going to teach everybody to read. And now we have the research that says everybody can learn to read. And as you pointed out, now we got to close that gap between what we know and what we do. And there is resistance at a lot of different levels.
John, tell us a little bit about that resistance.
Well, the resistance is, first I resisted. I kept a secret, an embarrassing secret. We're a nation that can send a rocket to Mars and send a picture back probably within 48 hours. We're a proud nation. We're a great nation. Look at all the technology. Look at all the tremendous great things we're doing. And we're failing to impart these basic skills with children. So we have to fess up. This nation has to fess up and to really say this is the problem. And to solve any social problem or personal problem, you have to articulate it. And and it has to be real clear. This is the problem. This is an urgency, and we all have. And you know how we're all jammed up over about everything in Washington, in the government and schools.
But where do you see that the change really needs to take place?
Where do I think it has to take place? Mm-hmm. I think that not only do we have to do the proper instruction from the universities, and you're talking about that. I think we know that intellectually. We know it. We haven't been able to. It's pretty tough, you know. Professors right now. You just mentioned a teacher that got one course. Well, that's not enough, and I would say in that change at the university level, and we've got resistance at the university level because the professors don't know how to impart these skills. For the most part, the old guard doesn't really know. We need practitioners, and to me, if I had a magic wand, I'd say every teacher that's getting a credential needs to teach a child and an adult as part of their intern to read, one-on-one tutoring test to move them, and use all. We have diagnostic tools that are very helpful, and all this science. And I had that experience of a diagnostic tool. They identified their problem, and then they attacked that problem, and boom, results. So we're close, but there's really a resistance. I think mostly, and I'm really happy to be on the show with you, and because this is a part of the awareness and the urgency, you know. And I do truly believe it has to take place. Also, this is a grassroots initiative, and parents have to. You know how parents can tell if their children are getting it? Sit down and ask them to read. It's not only the research based, because the schools might be saying, yeah, we're doing this research here, but I want to see the effect of it. I want to see it.
Absolutely. Parents have got to demand.
And here's
have to demand.
Here's another thing for the urgency, call for an urgency. While we have time and we have to go through this process, and we have to document the research and give it to the policymaker. A 6-year-old doesn't have any time. They just don't have any time. And the window is going to close, just like you said. Right. You know, by the time we get to the 5th grade, I mean, there's a lot of damage, and then all the resistance by the child too.
Dr. Scheffel, what do you think Colorado could do better? And we have a little bit of time left, but not too much. So,
you know, I think that we're on the right path, but we can do some things even stronger to really address this problem with more urgency. When we look at a state like Florida, teachers in elementary education programs have to take an average of 16 credits in literacy. And so we know that if the courses aren't comprised of the right kind of information, if the students don't have a lab where they can actually practice their skills, if they don't have a good mentor, if they don't have good practicum and clinical practice experiences, then the courses themselves won't be enough. But in Colorado, the average is 9 credits. So the credits themselves aren't necessarily the issue, but certainly time to really learn this really central skill can really help us. And when we think another thing that Colorado could do is to assess teachers in the science of reading. And so right now we try to use a rubric at the Department of Education to evaluate courses in literacy, but we don't actually test the teachers to see if they've mastered that knowledge. Again, the knowledge itself is a predicate, but they need to know how to apply it.
Another thing Florida does is that they actually test their teacher candidates before they go into the program for basic knowledge. Yeah,
that's right.
We need to wrap things up. So John, go ahead and
one of the things I think
comments.
we need to do is find and create safe environments for teachers that are going through, whether teachers that are being through their training. It's safe to say, I don't know. I don't know how to do it, and this is the proper instruction. And it's the same phenomena as a learner. Good teachers have to be good learners, and we have to make it safe. And that means we can't be blaming them. And sometimes people say, "Well, I'm blaming the teacher." I am not blaming them. I'm calling on accountability and reasonable and fair to expect. That if a child goes to school for 12 years, they're going to come out of there being able to read and write an essay, and that's fair. And I think we just have to reach out to teachers and find the safe places, and the universities too. And I want you to have your last word too.
My thought would be just that if we care about reforming K-12 education, literacy is at the core of that, and the other concept to end on perhaps is just that there's so much hope. The core of great achievement is good instruction by wonderful teachers. Teachers is such a noble profession. Teachers care about children. They love other people's kids. And so how can we equip them with the tools so that they can be highly successful for the students in Colorado and other students across the nation?
And it's never too late. And it's as important to teach an adult in America today to read as it is to teach a child to read.
And if people want to know more information about the John Corcoran Foundation, how do they go about
Visit
doing that?
our website, johncorcoran.com.
All right, and you all actually have a center here
Yes.
in Colorado.
Yes, right.
What do you do there?
Well, we've also been a supplemental service provider in Colorado and California and Nevada. And we have an online tutoring program, and we give our students, their Title I kids, computers. And if they finish the program, they get to keep the computers. So we're putting technology in the house. We're putting a learning center in the house, basic skills, and other people in the household are also paying attention to this computer and this. So it's kind of a little pilot program, but we're 800 students last year. So.
Well, I thank both of you for your work for kids, for Colorado kids. And I would encourage everyone to look at our website, schoolchoiceforkids.org. And for other information about the Independence Institute and all the work that we do, you can find it at independenceinstitute.org. This is Pam Benigno with Devil's Advocate. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, great.
Thank you.